I'm Susan Birch, and welcome to another A Healthy New Zealand podcast. My guest today is a total badass, Dr. Shawn Baker. He played Premier League rugby for Waikato in the 90s, so he feels like he's one of us. He set world records across 3 different sports. He's had a military career. He's a doctor and orthopaedic surgeon. He runs a company called Meat RX and has a very successful podcast. He wrote the book, The Carnivore Diet, and eats a carnivore diet himself. So Shawn, thanks so much for coming and being here.
Yeah, Susan, thanks for having me here. I always have a special place in my heart for the Kiwis, and as you mentioned, I got to spend some time in the early 1990s playing rugby in the Waikato, and so it always makes me smile when I hear that the Kiwi accent, and it's nice to talk about this stuff. And so I'm looking forward to sort of chatting with you.
Thank you very much. Hey, would you like to give us just a little bit of your background and story so people know who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned, I'm an MD. I was trained as an orthopedic surgeon. I took kind of a circuitous route through my career, and it still continues to get a little bit different than normal. And so, I went to college in Texas, back in the 1980s, and got into medical school. And my first year of medical school, I started playing rugby, and I had some natural talent, at least in the U.S. And one of the professors there was from New Zealand. And he knew a team in Cambridge, New Zealand, that was looking for a good, second row or lock, and I fit the bill. And so I actually dropped out of medical school to go play rugby in New Zealand for a while. And then I came back, and I was still wanting to play, and so I joined the United States Air Force, because at that time the military in the United States was the only place where they had halfway decent rugby facility. Or the opportunity to do it. So I joined the military. I became, my day job was a nuclear weapons launch officer. So I was responsible for all these nuclear wars. And I know New Zealand's not a fan of nuclear stuff, but that was my job, and I did that for about 5 years. And then I continued to play rugby in the U.S. At different representative levels. And at about age 30, I remember I was laying on the bottom of a ruck and getting my head kicked in. I had blood coming out of my ears. And I said, well, I'm kind of old. I'm going to hang this up. And so I went back to medical school, and the military paid for it. Very nice, very thankfully. And then so I did my, return to medical school, finished out, graduated with honors, got into a very selective orthopedic surgery residency, became an orthopedic surgeon, and then went back into the military to repay my time. So I owed them an additional, just about 5 years because they paid for it. And so then I was sent to Afghanistan, where I spent, a great deal of time doing a lot of trauma surgery and taking care of, civilians and military members, both good guys and bad guys. I actually operated on quite a few of the Taliban, quite interestingly. And then I went back. Then I left the military and went into civilian practice. Became the head of a surgical group, and did that for several years, and was very productive, doing thousands and thousands of surgeries. And then I started to take notice about nutrition personally, because I was noticed, as an athlete, I'd been, like as you mentioned, I'd been fortunate to set world records in a number of different sports, particularly as a masters athlete. And despite all the hard training I was doing, I was seeing that my health was starting to be like everybody else's. I was, I was training hard, and I don't think you could train much harder, particularly given, my lifestyle. I started to play with diet, and, what I found for me was, just going with, the standard advice, which is, eat low fat, eat a lot of vegetables, just eat a little bit of lean protein. I found that, to be honest, it worked for me. It allowed me to lean out, but I was so miserable. I was constantly hungry, and it wasn't sustainable. And I was a pretty disciplined person. And so I figured, I just said, I just can't do this for the long haul. And so I started playing with different dietary approaches, which included things like the paleo diet, which was in vogue, about 10 years ago. And then I got into some low carb stuff and a ketogenic diet. And then about 6 years ago, I guess it's been now, I started seeing these people that were just eating meat. And I thought, this is very bizarre. How weird is that, to just eat meat? Because it's just so foreign to sort of the modern Western culture. And then I started, reading more about it and actually seeing these people, and objectively, they were getting very healthy. And that was quite surprising to me, but it wasn't so weird that I wasn't willing to try it, because I'd already, as I sort of investigated about nutrition, I saw how bad the science actually is. I mean, it's not very strong science. There's a lot of, confounders, and a lot of what we rely on is it's called epidemiology, which is not very particularly helpful. And so as I realized that we don't really know that much about nutrition, I said, well, I'm going to see what my own results are, and why not try it yourself? And I tried this all meat diet. And I was on social media, and, we kind of joked about it. We said, I'm going to do it for 30 days. And, surely I'm going to die of a heart attack. Surely I'm going to have scurvy. My colon will probably fall out. I mean, all these things where, that are these sort of concerns about that. And I did the diet, and none of the bad things, none of that happened to me. I mean, I had a little bit of a headache for about a week, but that went away. And then I felt great. I mean, I literally felt like, 10 years have been taken off me. And so at the end of the 30 days, I went back to the sort of the omnivorous diet I'd been on. And I just immediately felt worse. I was like, well, this isn't good. So I continued on this meat-based diet. And I did it, and I kind of made it for 2 months, and then it was 6 months, and it was a year. And I remember my family was like, well, how are you going to do this? And I'm like, well, I don't know. And it became 2 years, and now it's been five years that I've been doing this. And, I've had the fortune to, get some people, I went on Joe Rogan's podcast, which is a pretty big podcast if you're unfamiliar with him. And I exposed a lot of people to this crazy diet. And we've had now literally tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people who have gone on this. And, some of the folks in New Zealand, some of the high level athletes have done it. Owen Franks from the All Blacks, and Sonny Bill Williams, and some of the others that you guys may be familiar with have done this diet with great success. And so what we're discovering is that meat is not a problem. Meat is a health food. It is an incredibly important part of the diet, and the demonization, particularly red meat, is completely unjust, and it's based on, making extrapolations from people eating a standard Western, standard American, standard whatever diet you want to call it, which is filled with garbage, and the meat is not the problem. But there is such a push to get you on these cheap, synthetic, highly processed products for profit motives. I mean, it's purely based on profit. They'll wrap it in the guise of it's good for the environment, it's good for human health, it's cruelty free, which is all a bunch of nonsense, quite honestly. And I continuously push back on that. And so it's obviously a message that runs counter to what we hear a lot about. But I think it's something that it's very easy to confirm. I mean, a lot of these things about, we have these discussions about things we can't really prove as an individual. I don't know if the world's getting warmer. I don't know if, it's more people are dying from a virus. I have to take other people's word for it. But what I can do is I can look in the mirror and I can see I'm feeling better. Both figuratively and literally, you can look in the mirror. I'm off medications. I've lost body fat. I'm happy more. I mean, all these things you can verify individually. And we've got literally thousands of people that have done this. And in fact, I know I'm talking a lot here, but I get going. Sometimes it's hard to stop. But Harvard University has just finished writing up a study on this carnivore diet. They had 2,000 people that participated. Anywhere between 6 months was the minimum, and all the way up to 28 years. We had one of the participants was in the 28 years on this diet. When people talk about sustainability, we got somebody who's done it for 28 years, and there's many people that have done it for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, quite honestly. And the results were very, 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 very positive. I mean, I'll use a diabetic cohort. I think they have the 2,000 people that they studied. I think they had 260 diabetics, and fully 100% of them came off injectable medications other than insulin, and 92% of them got off all their insulin. 84% of them came off all their oral medications. And I think there is no other dietary, lifestyle, or medical intervention that even touches that as far as, these diabetics. That's not to mention all the other conditions that we see improve with this diet, including autoimmune issues, skin issues, arthritis, mental health issues, on and on and on. So that's a little bit about my background and what I'm, kind of about for the most part. I mean, I touch on some other areas because I have a background, and, I'm a father of 4 children, and, I have a lot of other interests outside of just eating meat, but, that's probably where most people are familiar with me about.
Thanks for that. Gosh, there's so many topics in there. We might talk about a few of them a bit more in a minute. But, the main issue that people face is this messaging that we get from healthcare officials, from their doctors, from health authorities. In New Zealand, every night on the news, we're told to eat a vegan diet, have the colours of the rainbow, that's healthy. It's interesting that you, with your medical background, stand up and challenge that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, certainly. I don't think, if you made this, this point, eat the rainbow, eat all these different colors. Well, I mean, I would argue that most of those colors don't even grow in the same region, and in many cases, not even the same continent. And so how do you think human beings would have survived? And I think if we're feeding animals, and let's just pretend for a minute that humans are actually animals or part of the animal kingdom, which clearly we are. If you're going to feed a wild animal, you're going to observe it in the wild and you're going to mimic whatever it's eating. If you can, you don't take a lion to the grocery store to pick out its food. I mean, you pretty much know what he's eating. He's eating zebras and gazelles and wildebeest and whatnot. And, if we observe, we don't really have a lot of wild humans left because we've all been civilized and we live in, little homes and stuff like that. If we start looking at, wild humans, they're going to be limited to what's in their environment, right? And interestingly, humans are the most geographically diverse species on the planet. I mean, there's no other species that has such a broad geographic range as humans do. I mean, we live in every niche on the planet, essentially, except for maybe the inside of a volcano or the very frigid regions of the Arctic. But everywhere else, we have human beings. And the second most diverse species is the wolf. And one of the reasons humans have been able to exploit all these different geographic and environmental situations is because of the access to meat. I mean, this is something that you're looking at. I can go anywhere on the planet and find some animal that I can hunt, kill, and eat, and we've done that. I mean, clearly humans have hunted and eaten every animal that walks, swims, or flies. I mean, we've hunted it and eaten it because we can. Now, if I were to say I'm supposed to be on a plant-based diet, I would, and we're required to do that, and it's a necessity for our survival. I'm going to say, well, what plant can you point to that grows in every region of the world in every season? And there's none. I mean, you might make the argument for grass, but I mean, clearly we're not all eating grass. And so it's something that, I mean, just from a common sense evolutionary perspective, and a lot of people like to dismiss that. I think humans are unique in our desire to do that. I mean, we make this food that is not particularly good for us. I mean, most of the modern diet is we're not really designed to eat it. I mean, we tolerated it, I think, at best, and I would say arguably many people don't tolerate it very well, and that's why we see this chronic disease running rampant throughout the Western society, and I'm sure New Zealand I'm sure the obesity epidemic has not missed New Zealand. I haven't, like I said, I haven't been there in 25 years, or 30 years now, gosh, it's been 30 years ago, goodness. And so what we're seeing is an attempt to get people to eat less calories, and this is what these plant-based diets can do. I mean, you're gorging on fiber, and you're filling your stomach up, but you're not really taking in nutrition. You might be not eating the sugary stuff, the chocolates and the cookies and chips and all those types of things by eating a plant-based diet, but you're still missing out on such good nutrition by excluding meat. And New Zealand is just a wonderful place for raising cattle and raising sheep. I mean, obviously you guys are known for your sheep there, but it's incredible that a country like New Zealand would even entertain pushing a vegan diet on its population. It's just I think it's purely based on corporate interest and the corporations that are in control of much of the food supply worldwide really like pushing out cheap products. And whenever I see plant-based on a label, I think cheap and highly profitable. I mean, that's what you're getting. You're not really getting high quality nutrition. You may be getting less junk food, but you're not getting the top stuff. And the top stuff is, what it's always been, which is meat. Meat was a currency up until not long ago. How many cattle you had indicated your wealth because it was so incredibly valuable to humans, and it still is. It hasn't changed. We haven't changed as a species. Our physiology remains what it was, 10,000, 100,000, 300,000 years ago since Homo sapiens sort of arose. But yeah, it's the push for veganism is, I think, almost completely an astroturfed movement. It's not a green movement like people think. It's not a grassroots movement. It's an astroturf movement where corporations are developing the supposed demand and paying people to pretend that they want this, and and then of course they're trying to appeal to the young people that don't have much experience and much insight, and to say, oh, well, look how great it is. You're going to save a little pig's life or a little cow or a sheep's life by eating these lentils. And what they forget to tell you is there's a tremendous amount of animal death that goes into raising those other crops. I mean, it's clear.
Yeah, and then even the environmental question is really up for debate as well. But the other thing, you mentioned in there that they might be eating less processed food, but I do really wonder whether that's true or not, because I think that there's a whole lot of people who are saying, I'm going plant-based, but they think that just means I can eat, the standard Western diet and don't eat meat. So they're still eating the crap, still eating the seed oils.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and that's definitely true. I think, again, that's why so many of the physicians are out there pushing a whole foods plant-based diet. This is the sort of mantra that they often will utilize. And definitely you can eat a junk food vegan diet, and there's plenty of people do, and they don't get healthy. They just feel like they've done something for the environment or done something for some animal, when in reality they've actually done nothing. In fact, they might have made the situation worse for both the environment and for the animals. The amount of processing, and this is what clearly happens every time you take a highly nutritious product like meat or dairy or butter out of the diet, it immediately is filled with a processed analog. And this is what will happen with meat. You see this explosion of these synthetic faux meats that are just clearly processed, and they're not good for us by any stretch. But the people that market it are gonna try to persuade you that it is, and it is in no way better for the environment, for human health, or animal welfare. None of that is true. And when you touched on the environmental issue, I mean, the arguments that they make about the environment are so incredibly misleading. And again, this is all due to profit. I mean, if you look at the United States, for instance, we know that cattle contribute about 2% to our greenhouse gas emissions. And, the United States is a country that emits a lot of greenhouse gases. So cattle are not the problem in the United States. Certainly the transportation industry, the energy sector, the industry sector are all, they create 80% of our greenhouse gases, if you want to make that argument. Cattle are worth 2%. In New Zealand, you've got a higher percentage of greenhouse gases coming from your cattle, but you don't have the industry that you do. I mean, the net amount coming out of New Zealand is minuscule compared to what's coming out of the United States, or God forbid, China, or some of these other countries that are huge global polluters. And so the desire to scale back on highly nutritious food to benefit the environment is only going to lead to more illness, more sickness. You're going to have a sick population. In the United States, our healthcare, I mentioned the cattle are 2% of our greenhouse gases. Well, our healthcare sector is 10% of our greenhouse gases. And so when you shift more people to the unhealthy side, they use more healthcare resources, and they contribute in other ways. And we don't look at this overall picture. And so if you instead were to feed these people appropriately and get them off the processed food, have them eat some more highly nutritious animal foods, there'd be a lot less of people dependent upon pharmaceuticals and healthcare, and we would ultimately fare a lot better. What's not sustainable environmentally are sick people, and we are creating them in spades, and it continues to be an issue and continues to get worse. And I don't know, no one that I can see is taking it seriously, or at least seriously in a way that actually will make a difference.
No, I agree. I was having a text conversation with a friend who's a doctor yesterday, and pointing out that, with our COVID lockdowns, why isn't our Prime Minister standing up on the TV every day telling people to get healthy as part of the COVID strategy? And she makes comments like, oh, well, we've always known that pre-COVID. And I'm like, we know it, but we don't do anything about it. And doctors are the worst, all they want to do is dish out some pharmaceuticals. But anyway, that's me going off on a tangent.
Well, and I think that's a good tangent to go off of, and because of this, this current pandemic that we find ourselves in, it's really, really frustrating as someone who is a physician who truly cares about getting people healthy and getting them off medications. This would have been an incredibly opportune time to really develop that message, because I look at the smoking epidemic that we had in the United States. In 1954, 45% of our population was a smoker, which is high. Today it's 14%, and the reason that we reduced the smoking rates are because there was a very large, well-funded national push to cut back on smoking. And we spent the resources. We could very easily do the same thing with obesity via, ultra-processed food. I mean, it's not a secret what's causing this. I don't think anyone is, at this point unaware that all these ultra-processed, highly, just garbage that we eat, which is the vast majority of our diet, is the issue by and large. And if we were to push back on that, yes, a lot of companies would go out of business. They'd lose a lot of revenue, and a lot of them fund a lot of our politicians, either directly or indirectly. And so I think that's really that's the elephant in the room, and everybody can see that. And the fact that we've spent, I think in the United States, we've spent upward of $1 trillion on our COVID response, and I cannot go anywhere without seeing some messaging to put a mask on or social distance or go get a vaccine or something like that. It is everywhere, round the clock, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If we were to spend even 20% of that on a messaging of, hey, just get a little exercise every day. Hey, stop eating the ultra processed food, and do that every day, you would see probably a far better, far more effective, and far more reaching impact on the society. Because this pandemic side is, yes, there's a virus floating around, but there's hosts, and host health matters as well. What kind of person are you? What kind of person is the virus landing on? Is it a young, healthy, fit person, or is it someone who has 6 comorbidities? That's going to make a huge difference in the outcome. And even though we know that, and it's not a secret, and it's never been a secret, we're not trying to address these comorbidities. I've seen people, and blood glucose is a huge one, and we've seen people literally within days cut their blood glucose in half, some of these diabetics. I mean, it is something that can be mitigated and improved in a very rapid fashion. We have people all the time that lose, in a month, they'll lose, 10 kilograms. That's not unusual. I see that all the time. So it's something that, we've been doing this for now a year and a half. We've had plenty of time to do this. And the fact that we are still not addressing these things is, to me, so incredibly almost infuriating, and it's one of those things that I keep talking about. Like you mentioned, I have a company, we call it Revero, not now Revero Health. We kind of changed the name a little bit, but MeatRx. I mean, I'm literally one person, essentially, I've got help in this, but I'm not a government agency. I don't have $1 billion or multi-billion-dollar budget. I'm one person by the seat of my pants, have taken thousands of people and reversed their metabolic disease and had them lose, collectively tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of pounds, got them off of all kinds of medications. That's one person, working to do this. Can you imagine if you had the entire weight of the U.S. government, the New Zealand government, the Australian government, whatever, the European Union saying, hey, look, we're going to go, there's a national campaign, let's get out the junk food. Let's everybody get healthy, get up and do your press-ups, your push-ups, go for a 15-minute walk. But none of that's happening. And it's clearly that there are, corporations that are not wanting to see that happen.
Yeah, and I think, one of the messages that come out from the medical profession here, which, my friend yesterday, she said, oh, well, these are non-modifiable diseases. And I'm just like, look, I'm not even going to go there with you, because that is just so wrong. And if our medical profession think that these metabolic disorders are non-modifiable and can only respond to drugs, well, what are the people going to think?
Yeah, I understand why physicians see that, because, they've maybe early in their career, they gave some lip service and they told people to go exercise more and, cut back on eating, and hasn't worked, and therefore they're like, I'm not going to spend my time. And quite honestly, most physicians, at least in the United States, you get 15 minutes, and half of that time is taken up typing on the computer and the electronic medical record and checking the billing and the coding and all that stuff. And so you don't really have much time to spend with your patients. And so, you're like, well, I don't have time to talk to you about what you eat or your lifestyle, and I don't have the resources to make you change anyway, so I'm not going to do it. And what I do have the resources to is ample resources to every drug known to man, and more coming and more being developed every year. And so I'm going to do that, and I'm encouraged to do that. The system encourages me to do that, and that's what I get paid to do, quite honestly. And so unless you're willing to sacrifice some of your paycheck, or take more time with your patients when you've got the administration telling you can't do that, it's really difficult. So I think really no one is served by that system. Certainly the physicians are frustrated and they're not served well, and they've kind of given up, and the patients are, obviously it's a disservice to most of the patients, and the only ones that seem to benefit are maybe some of the hospital administration, and their shareholders for the stocks, for the stockholders.
Mm. Well, let's talk about some of the criticisms of a meat-based diet, because I think a lot of people look at it and are intrigued, but they're very worried about things like their cholesterol, for example, or gout, or kidney disease, or osteoporosis, or, cancer. This is the stuff that's been shoved at us a lot. So, if you want to talk a little bit about, those epidemiological studies where that stuff comes from, and then what you've seen and what your perspective is about, those
Sure.
issues.
Yeah, well, obviously, all of those topics could individually take up several hours to talk about, but I'm just kind of the high points. And so there are certainly associations in the data that would suggest, and it's not consistent, by the way. There's plenty of studies that don't point to meat as being associated to either cancer or heart disease or diabetes or the things you mentioned, gout and kidney disease. So there's associational studies that are there. And when, obviously, when you take large population samples and you ask them to remember what you ate for the last 6 months, there's going to be a lot of errors. So you're dealing with pretty poor data to start with. You might get some trends in there, but you're not accurate. I know what I can pretty confidently say, if you ask me how many tomatoes I ate in the last year, the answer is going to be 0 because I don't eat them. But the average person that's eating a mixed diet is not going to know the amount, the frequency, the quantity of everything they're going to ask. And so they're going to have very, very poor data, and many people will overestimate this and underestimate that because they think they're trying to pass a test, and so there's this bias to do that stuff. And so that's how most of the data on what people eat is. So we really don't even know what people are eating. We're basing data on what people think they remember they ate, and that's a really bad place to start with. And so these associations show up that way. But the problem with that is, again, if I, for 20 years, tell you that eating red meat is bad for you, and you persist and continue to do it anyway, well, what other things are out there that are bad for you are you going to do? Are you going to drink more? Are you going to smoke more? Are you going to not exercise? Are you going to, not go to the physician when you need to? Are you going to wear your seatbelt? Are you going to drive recklessly? So you've got a bias built, and we call it I'm sure you're familiar, they call it the healthy user bias. And so when you've pre-selected people that you tell this is bad for your health, it's like, comparing all these other factors to smoking. We know that you're not supposed to smoke. And if you choose to smoke, you probably drink. And if you choose to drink, you probably, drink when you're driving, perhaps. And all these things. So it basically skews the demographic a certain way. And then also we know that people that engage in quote unquote healthy behaviors tend to be more affluent. And so wealth is another big discriminating factor. And so if you look at all these people that eat these healthy fruits and vegetables, one, they're more expensive in many cases. And so therefore you've already selected for a socially higher strata, and they always have better health outcomes. If you look across the world in longevity, the richest countries live the longest. And there's a lot of reasons to go into that. But, by the way, they tend to eat more meat, by the way, most of the wealthy countries. But when we go to these specific, things like cancer, for one, everybody's probably familiar with the World Health Organization, who, depending on what you think of them these days, a lot of people have lost a lot of faith in the World Health Organization. But the World Health Organization back in 2015 commissioned a panel called the IARC, the International Association for Research on Cancer, I think in Lyon, France, 2015. And they came up with the conclusion, I think there were 22 panelists, and they came up with this conclusion that red meat is a class 2 carcinogen, processed meat is a class 1 carcinogen, and therefore, and this was a big statement. And the problem with that was that opinion was not based on a consensus for sure. There was many dissenting. I think something like fully like 40% of the people on that panel dissented on that. They did not agree with the findings. One of them, I'm blanking on his name right now. I think maybe it'll come to me later. But I've seen him interviewed, and he said that David Clearfield was his name, Professor David Clearfield, and he basically said that look, they threw out almost every epidemiologic study that did not agree with their conclusion. They just threw it out on principle. They had no actual human data other than they had a couple rat studies which were basically saying that these rats that were fed a meat-based diet with sugar and all this other garbage they put in rat chow, and they were genetically designed to get cancer, and they fed them a cancer-promoting agent and a lot of sugar, developed precancerous cytology, and therefore they concluded that therefore it must be the meat, and therefore it's extrapolatable to humans, and it really is not. And so additionally, fully I think a third of the members of that panel were vegan, vegetarian, or Seventh-day Adventists, which already had this huge ethical bias towards red meat being bad. And so and Clearfield pointed this out and said, hey guys, you got a bunch of vegans and vegetarians on this panel. Shouldn't we say something about it? And they said, nope, we're not going to mention that. And so subsequent to that study on red meat and cancer, there's been a number of studies that have come out now, including one which is very controversial, done by the Nutrirex organization in 2019. Senior author was a guy named Gordon Guyatt. Gordon Guyatt is literally the father of evidence-based medicine. He literally invented that term in 1991. He authored a single author paper saying evidence-based medicine, this is how we assess it. And he's been assessing the evidence ever since then. He's probably the world's authority on assessing the evidence. And he was on that 14-member panel. It was international, and they came to the conclusion, look, there is no strong evidence whatsoever to suggest that red meat is a carcinogen. There's no strong evidence whatsoever to suggest that red meat causes heart disease. And so their recommendation was just keep eating like you've been doing. And that pissed off a lot of people. The plant-based advocates from the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, led by Neil Bernard, who's a lifelong animal rights activist and vegan physician, petitioned the Federal Trade Commission to try to have those studies, basically removed from the articles. And I had 6 studies that came out on this. And so one of the things, but let's just assume that the World Health Organization study was completely accurate, and there's no reason to question that. Their relative risk for colorectal cancer is what they declared was something like 17% for red meat. So if you eat a certain amount of red meat, your relative risk goes up by 17%. Now, anybody that understands relative and absolute risk would question that. And so you would say, well, what is my absolute risk? And so if we look at, just a generic person, you've got about a 4% chance of contracting colon cancer at some point in your life. Which, 4% is not nothing, but it's not, when you increase it by 17%, that 4% goes not quite to 5%, somewhere in there. So it's like a 1% increase. So you're telling me I should go vegan for a 1% decrease in my risk of colorectal cancer. For some people, maybe it's worth it. For other people, it's not. But then you start to look at, well, what are the other things that are contributing to your risk for colorectal cancer? Well, one, obesity, particularly central obesity. And so when we start looking at relative risk numbers on obesity, well, it's like 300% or maybe 400 or 500 or 600%, depending on the study you're looking at. And so you're like, well, I can eat a meat-based diet, and what many people see is they lose their obesity, so their risk for the obesity driving factor has gone down by 500%, and if you believe the World Health Organization, it's gone up the other way 17%. Well, down 500% and up 17% looks like a pretty good trade-off to me, and that's just one thing. If we look at insulinemia, that's another one that has about a 300% increased relative risk. If we look at things like inflammatory bowel disease, which is a huge risk factor for colorectal cancer, it's something like a 3,000% relative risk increase. Those people that have ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease. And what I see pretty regularly now is people that have those diseases go on a carnivore diet and it goes away. I mean, they literally go into remission. So you have to think that probably that inflammatory, as the inflammation goes away, which makes sense, your risk for colorectal cancer goes away as well. And so, you have to look at risk in the general picture. And so when I see things like, I'm not going to eat meat because, or I'm afraid to eat meat because, or fat, I'm afraid because my cholesterol is going to go up. Sometimes it does. It's kind of inconsistent. Some people it goes up, some people it goes down, some people it doesn't really do anything. It's widely variable, which most people don't know. Your cholesterol doesn't stay at whatever number all the time. It's up, it's down, it's up, it's down. So if you test it here when it's down, the doctor's like, good job. But if you happen to test it here when it's up, they say, oh, bad job, you got to go on this drug for the rest of your life, which is insanity in my view. But what we often see is someone who comes in, they start out, 30 kilos overweight, they're diabetic, pre-diabetic, they have hypertension, they have fatty liver, they have chronic inflammation, they're depressed, they go on this carnivore diet or something similar, and everything gets better. Their depression goes away, their blood pressure normalizes, their body fat drops down, their diabetes is gone, their inflammation's gone, their blood pressure's normal, and their cholesterol went up. And we're like, all of those other things were risk factors for heart disease, and cholesterol. And so how do you put that into context for overall context? And I think a reasonable person would say, hey, look, I had 10 risk factors which were driving me towards heart disease. I got rid of 10 of them and I traded for one being increased. And then the question is that really even a risk factor anymore in that situation, which I don't think we actually even know. So I think it's something, and you can say that for all things. The myth about high protein diets and kidneys are it's been refuted so many times. I mean, there's a nice paper that Stu Phillips did in 2018. It's a meta-analysis of all the data on kidney function and protein diets, and the conclusion of that study is basically, look, high protein diets don't injure your kidneys. And in fact, there was a recent study just came out done by David Unwin in the UK, and he practices a low carb animal based diet for his patients in a small town in the UK. And I think the study was on diabetics, but it might have been just people with chronic renal disease. And what he saw is by switching to a higher protein animal-based diet, their kidney disease actually got better. The people that had chronic renal insufficiency saw that improve to normal levels in many cases. And so, there's just so much misinformation out there. And there's this again, like I said, we are seeing whoever funds the message is what people tend to believe, and it's an absolute travesty. And people are suffering because of it. I mean, people's healths they're not getting better. I mean, you think about all the technology we've developed in the last several decades. I mean, we have billions of dollars invested in technology. We have so many tests we can now do. There's so many ways to look at people, and despite all that, people just get fatter and sicker.
Yeah.
It's like as the technology increases, so does the obesity and the chronic disease. So it's not helping. And so, I mean, you think about what my grandparents had available to them from a perspective, and a lot of it was common sense and personal observation. We've gotten away from that. We're not even looking. It's funny, you go to the physician and instead of, hey, how you doing? And just kind of seeing what's going on, it's like, let me get these 27 labs and imaging studies, and this is how I'm going to slice and evaluate you. And you're looking at that, well, the doctor must know what he's talking about, because I don't know what any of these things mean. I don't know how to do these things. I don't have access to them, but he does it for a living, and therefore he's right. And some people, literally, they'll leave the physician's office with a fistful of medications and a bunch of labs, and 3 years later they're like, I'm no better, in fact I'm worse. And that's because they're not addressing the issues that need to be addressed.
Not going and looking at that kind of root cause problem. I think it's interesting with the sort of keto diets now that there's starting to be more of a push towards more protein in those now, which is, in my opinion, has been a long time coming. But I think that's a step in the right direction.
Well, yeah, hopefully. I mean, like I said, there's a lot of steps that need to be taken, and hopefully there's a silver lining in this cloud of pandemic stuff, and maybe some people will wake up to the need to start to address this. I mean, I know I've been beating this drum for almost a decade now, and I think some other people are finally starting to see that the pharmaceutical companies don't really necessarily have our best interest in mind. In many cases, it's purely, I think profit is their major motivation. And then, if somebody gets less symptoms, then that's a, that's an extra consideration. But the first criteria is answering to the shareholders. I think I think they've even got a former CEO of one of these big pharmaceutical companies came out and quite honestly said that. And they said, look, we're not interested in helping people. We're interested in paying our shareholders, our shareholders revenue, which is, at least he's being honest. You have to give him that.
Hey, what about talking about nutrient density versus energy density? Meat offers us so many unique nutrients that we can't get from plant foods. B12, for example, we have to supplement, but there's all, carnosine and carnitine and, all sorts of things. Choline,
there's
taurine,
right. These are some of the things that some of us have been familiar with. Most people, think meat is some protein and some fat and a couple of vitamins, and that's it. And meat is, not only if you look at the standard nutrition label and you've got these 30 or 40 nutrients in there, how much magnesium and potassium and sodium and, choline and some of the things that aren't on there. But it's interesting, there's a study done by Professor Stefan Van Vliet out of Duke University, and he did the study I think it was last year. And they looked at, ground beef as a burger, and they compared it directly to one of these, I think it was the Impossible Burger, and the plant-based analog. And they looked at, what I didn't realize is there's something like 50,000 unique nutrients found in beef, 50,000 of them. And they just took selected several thousand of them, and they compared that versus the plant-based burger. And there was only about 10% overlap. The plant-based only provided 10% of the same nutrients that beef provides. And so you are clearly missing out on a lot of things, many of the things we don't even know yet or know what they do. We're just now coming to realize the importance of things like choline. This is something that, people on a vegan diet are like, well, we've got to substitute or supplement vitamin B12. But now they're seeing, well, maybe choline has an impact, particularly on child development. Maybe some of these other compounds like carnosine and creatine and carnitine and taurine and all these other things that do have a role. They have a role in brain function, immune health, on and on and on, which you are, going to have a relative deficiency. Some of those we can make, they're conditionally beneficial, but, let's say you're stressing your body out, you have an infection. We're seeing, clearly with these plant-based diets, a much greater fracture risk. And several studies have come out showing that. I think there's like a 40% increased risk of bone fracture for people who have been on plant-based diets for over long periods of time, which we're seeing that clinically happen all the time. We're seeing, as an orthopedic surgeon, I can remember operating on people. And, again, there are people on a standard American diet that are in the same condition, because they don't eat enough meat either. We see a lot of vitamin B12 deficiency on the standard American diet, but the problem with that is they don't eat enough meat. They're eating a bunch of junk food, and you're going to have nutrient deficiencies in that situation as well. And so the vegans will say, well, everybody else is the same way. It's not just a vegan diet. What I will say is, when I've seen people on a carnivore diet, they almost never have B12 deficiency. In fact, they usually have super sufficiency of B12. Their numbers are at the top of the chart typically. And so I think the problem is we just don't eat enough meat in our diet. The average American beef consumption is somewhere around 2 ounces, which is, a vanishingly small amount. It's not much at all. 2 ounces a day, which is, that wouldn't be even enough to power me up the stairs. I think about what I eat. I'm eating closer to 2 kilos a day, and it's kind of, but, it's, by that measure, I should be dead already. I should be the sickest person on the planet eating that much meat, right? If you believe all the problems that are attributed to meat, and yet, here I am at, soon to be 55, performing at an extremely high level, maintaining a lean physique, free of disease and doing great. So, it's interesting.
So what about energy, Shawn? Because like you say, you're a really high performing athlete. And a lot of people say they've tried going low carb or carnivore, and their athletic performance really reduces. Have you got any thoughts about that?
I do, yeah. So as an athlete, like I said, I was able to set world records on this Concept 2. This is right behind me here. I don't know if you can see it. Where is it? Right there, that Concept 2 machine in my garage. As a complete carnivore, and I've seen, like I said, I mentioned, we had Owen Franks and Sonny Bill Williams and Quade Cooper in Australia and Danny Sorensen from the NFL and Georgia Karakanian from the mixed martial art professionals, and lots and lots of folks demonstrating all the time they can perform at very high levels on a carnivore diet. I think there's a period of adaptation that takes a while. It probably takes several months to get used to. Physiologically, some of the things that are going on is we know that, for instance, that may make you struggle initially. You're not producing as much insulin, and insulin is responsible for many things. But one of the things it does is it leads to retention of both sodium and water, and so you have more fluid in your body, and muscles work better when they're better hydrated. And so one of the problems is dealing with hydration. So there's ways around that, by just increasing your salt and electrolyte consumption, particularly around workouts or performances, and that seems to help quite a bit. The other thing is, making sure you're consuming enough calories, because as an athlete, you need to be on a high calorie diet to match your output. And a lot of people find that a meat-based diet is extremely satiating. They struggle to eat enough food, and so you have to kind of go out of your way to eat enough. And some people can do it, and some people can't. I for one have no problem eating a lot of food if I want to, and so I've never had trouble with that. But there's a lot of people that they get through their 500 grams of meat and they're like, I'm done for the day. And then for an athlete, that may not be enough. Some of the positive things we're seeing is improvements in recovery for various reasons. I think burning through a high carbohydrate diet, I think, creates a greater degree of oxidative stress in the body. We see higher amounts of reactive oxygen species, and your body has to deal with that. You deal with that when you're sleeping, when you're recovering. And sometimes if you exceed what you can recover from, then your recovery is delayed. And so the next day you wake up and you're like, I'm really sore and I don't feel like training. And sometimes you don't train because of that. And so whereas people often on carnivore diet, they'll wake up and they're like, hey, I feel great. I'm ready to go again. And so they can go again, they can go to high intensity, again, once you adapt to that. I think it kind of depends on the athlete. It depends on the sport they're dealing with, as far as how long it takes to adapt. Most people, see improvements in body composition and strength to weight ratio pretty consistently. Many people, depending on like the endurance athletes, will often find that they have very good endurance and consistent energy, and it's just a matter of getting adapted enough so you can do the higher end stuff. And I think that some of that's based on gluconeogenic efficiency, protein consumption, so making sure you're getting adequate protein. I think there was a recent study came out last year looking at low carbohydrate athletes in general, and they need higher protein. They basically just need higher protein to be able to perform in a lot of things. And so a lot of the low carb diets have been in this sort of ketogenic context, which traditionally has been kind of lower on the protein side. Whereas I would say it's not high protein. I should be more careful in saying that. The average American eats about 15% of their diet comes from protein. Mine is probably closer to 30 or 40%. My diet comes from protein, from a calorie percentage. And I think that's probably in line, probably more.
Mm-hmm.
What's that?
So I was going to say, we're talking about optimal protein, really, because, I always get worried when we say high protein, because it sounds like we're eating more than we should be, but we're talking about eating an optimal protein diet.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think probably somewhere around 30% is probably what we're designed to eat as human beings. And I think we thrive when we get into that range. Some people can go a little higher than that for a period of time. It's probably something that's not often sustainable for long periods of time, but and I've done that. I've eaten significantly more than 30% for short periods of time for different reasons. But I think the the belief that higher protein diets are bad for us is being popularized, I think, unfortunately, to the detriment of many people, and in fact, what most people out there are under eating protein, and we see the consequences of that all the time, particularly in our older populations with frailty, sarcopenia, and all the complications that are associated with that.
And I think one of the issues, we talked a few moments ago about, the keto diet and being in ketosis, and there's been a very strong idea that, too much protein will knock you out of ketosis. And so this focus on having ketone bodies and measuring your ketones has sort of been to the detriment of protein intake, at least in my opinion anyway.
Yeah, it has. And like I said, well, I certainly appreciate ketogenic diets, and I think they've been very beneficial for many people. There's a lot of people that struggle with them and don't get the results they want. And I think, when you sort of make a biomarker your goal, then you've kind of missed the boat. I mean, I think if your goal is to get leaner, to get rid of medications, and that should be your goal, and then you shouldn't get sort of sidetracked by what your blood ketone levels are, because those don't necessarily always correlate. I mean, you can be in ketosis and still put on body fat. I mean, that's clear. And you can be, one of the reasons people have high ketones is they're just inefficient at utilizing them. And so, particularly early on, you see people, they have these very high ketone readings, and then they go down and they get concerned, and they're like, well, my ketones dropped. Well, you got more efficient at utilizing them, so they're not hanging around your blood. So you don't need to be eating sticks of butter to try to drive them up higher. I mean, that's counterproductive. And so I think, I think that the benefits of getting rid of, particularly refined carbohydrates are beneficial. And I'm, even though I'm on a carnivore diet, I'm not anti-carbohydrate. I try not to be dogmatic about it. And I think there are certainly people that thrive on, some amount of carbohydrate in diet. I think most people probably overindulge in carbohydrates, particularly refined ones. But you can't deny that there are some people that do just fine with a certain amount of carbohydrate in their diet. And one of the things that we want to find out with this company, Revero, is how do we distinguish who's going to benefit from what source of food outside of meat? And I think that's a really fascinating part. And I think we're on the verge of starting to figure those things out, so we can kind of be better at, because you and I probably have very different dietary.
I was going to say, are you running some study on that, or are you doing some research on that?
Yeah, we're funding a study right now, so we're still in the fundraising portion of it. Yeah, but we intend to do, a multi-armed, large study, looking at, a carnivore diet and a standard diet and another diet that we're going to probably develop off of data that we're gathering. But yes, we want to contribute to the literature and, sort of validate what we're doing in a more scientific way. Although I don't think you need to do that for someone to adopt a diet. I didn't. When I started eating as a kid, my mother didn't look at the research to decide what to feed me. You just eat what you eat, and you get the results you get. But yeah, we are definitely in that fundraising. We've been fundraising for about a year now, and we've gotten a little over $200,000, but we've got a ways to go, and we've got some things coming up that'll hopefully help us to reach our goals in the near term.
Excellent. That'll be well worthwhile. A couple more questions, Shawn, if you've got a couple more minutes. One of the questions that comes up a lot for my clients is that they lose a certain amount of weight, and we know that, you lose a certain amount of water weight when you initially reduce your carbohydrates. But then their weight loss stalls out, and often they give up. Whatever diet they're doing, they give up because they reach this weight plateau and they've set their heart on getting under 100 kgs and they've got to 105 or something. Do you have any insights into why people struggle to continue to lose weight and get down to sort of a more normal weight? We see lots of people do really well and lose massive amounts, and then we have this other group who just really struggle. The reasons people struggle, there's obviously quite a few different reasons. One of the things that I like to address early on, regardless of your weight goals, is I think a lot of people struggle with, addictions to food. And I think you have to address that from the get-go. And I think that doesn't necessarily correlate with
losing a lot of weight rapidly. So I try to get people just to get off the other food and deal with the cravings, and there's ways to do that. I think eating sufficient amounts of high quality nutritionist food, and getting the other stuff away from you, and having support and all those things are important. So you do that, get them off the food addicts, because many people struggle because, they feel I did good for 5 days, I'm going to take one day off, and then they kind of sabotage themselves, and they, over time they can't consistently do that, and they end up kind of regressing back to the mean, and because they just can't get away from this stuff. But I think, there's other times where, let's say you're on a zero carbohydrate diet where you can't go any lower carb, and so what else can you do? What are the other options available to you? Well, I'm a huge proponent of resistance training. You get out there and start some strength training. That's going to, provide some metabolic capital that's very, very beneficial for you. It may jumpstart your weight loss. Again, some people, it depends on what they're doing macronutrient wise. I often find that increasing protein is often beneficial. It's for many people, that's usually one of the keys that works. Sometimes you have to be conscious about the number of calories. It's nice to not have to count calories and just rely on food. Many people do well with that, but at some point, calories still are relevant. And I think it's just important what those calories are. That's clear too. It's not just 2,000 calories is 2,000 calories, regardless of what it is. But I think you have to be mindful of all these things. And then there's other things, sleep can be a factor, and obviously what kind of exercise you're getting, what kind of, if you're sedentary versus non-sedentary. And I think just as much, I think a lot of people, equate going to the gym and doing an hour worth of training, walking on the treadmill or lifting weights, is what they need to do. And we're very often, most of the weight we're burning is not during the time of day when we're exercising. It's the rest of the time. As you notice, I'm standing up for this interview. It's giving me a slight advantage, metabolically. I try to, my mantra basically is if I'm sitting, can I stand? And if I'm standing, can I walk? And that's just something that I kind of do. Like if I've got something I can handle on my phone, often I'll go for a walk while I'm talking on the phone. And, that's just a little thing, a little habit I get into. And I literally spend almost none of my daytime sitting down. And, I think you can just make those little changes. And then again, I think support is a huge aspect of it. There's like I said, there's many reasons why people stall out and they don't do that. And, like I said, I think some people that are too adherent to a particular ideology, or they fail to look up and see what else they can do. And I think there's other levers that you can play with to reach your goals.
What's your thought about fasting in this process of making sure that you get enough protein in and you are actually consuming enough calories a day? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, that's something that can be certainly a tool that people can use. There's different, whether it's intermittent fasting within a 24-hour period. Some people do extended fastings where they'll go 24, 40, 72 hours without feeding. I think those can be useful. I think they can be problematic for people too. I think I think that I think in many cases your diet itself will lend itself to your eating pattern. When I'm eating a meat-based diet, I'm not hungry that often, and so I just kind of naturally gravitate to kind of a 2 meals a day type of pattern, which means I'm spending 12, 14, 16 hours a day in a fasting period. Usually my time between my last meal and my first meal is usually minimum 12 hours and often 16 or 18 hours. And some days I'll just eat once a day, but that's based upon my hunger and what I've eaten. I don't really sit there with a stopwatch and say, oh, I can't eat for another 22 minutes because it's not my time yet. And I think that is something that your diet should lead to. Now, some people have such a bad ability to assess hunger that they need that artificial window. They need that time frame so that they can. It's just a kind of a crutch that they can utilize, and over time you may not need that. But yeah, I think fasting can benefit a lot of people. I think if you're fit and lean and athletic and training a lot, then I think the fasting starts to become problematic in a lot of cases, particularly if you do it too frequently. And so, as an athlete, I almost never skip a day of eating. I mean, it's so incredibly rare that I do that. And even some of the big proponents of fasting that I'm familiar with and I've talked to are kind of the same mind. It's like, this fasting. I think that if you are going to fast, when you're eating, you should focus on protein, and you should continue to strength train, particularly during fasting, because your body is going to utilize its tissue. And there's been some studies out there that have shown that fasting just leads to a generalized loss of all tissue, whether it's fat, whether it's lean mass. And so you can sort of hedge your bets or, influence that by strength training, because if you're strength training, your body's getting a signal that's like, hey, I kind of need this muscle, so don't tap into it for energy right now. So if you're going to be fasting, you should probably be doing some strength training, in the interim. And then of course you should be getting adequate protein on the times that you're not eating. You can't really store protein in your body very well. I mean, I would argue to some degree, if you're eating a big, giant, huge steak, it's going to make its way through your digestive tract very slowly. You might spend 24 hours in your digestive tract, so you might have that protein kind of stored within your digestive tract, so you can kind of slowly utilize it. But we don't have we don't have like liver glycogen or adipose tissue that stores protein. Some people make the argument, well, muscle is your protein storage, but that's really not really a true use of muscle. I mean, it's not to store energy.
Yeah, excellent. Another quick question. People who get real sweet cravings who are on carnivore diets after they eat, is that something you come across? And do you have
Sure.
a solution?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yes, it almost, I'd say in a very high percentage of people, it's going to occur. I think, there's things you can do to mitigate that. I think if you plan for it, and don't sort of give into those cravings, you're gonna do better. I think it's not that I would say never for the rest of the life show anything sweet past your lips. I don't think you want to look at it that way, but I think you have to get to a point where you can deal with that, where you can say, hey, I'm gonna just find a way to deal with that. And I think so. Having a plan, say, okay, let's say it's 8 p.m. on a Friday, and I'm going to be craving something sweet or something carbohydrate, pizza or pasta or a piece of cake. What can I do to prevent me from indulging in that craving? And I think, there's a lot of things you can do. We know, for instance, exercise, depending on the time of day, right before bed, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but intense exercise is acutely anorexic. So if you go out there and sprint real hard on your bike, your appetite's going to be suppressed for a short period of time, maybe 30, 45 minutes. And that, these cravings tend to come in cyclic waves. And so they may crest and then they fall. And then if you just get past the crest, you can kind of be in this part where they're falling. And some of that's dictated by some of these hormones like ghrelin in particular. Ghrelin tends to peak for many people in the late afternoon or early evening. And that's when a lot of people have cravings. So having an alternative to gorging on the junk that you're craving, maybe just having enough extra meat cooked up or some bacon or something like that you can substitute it for and go for a walk, go for exercise, talk to somebody, distract yourself until you can make it to that bed, and then go to bed, and you might go to sleep, just sort of quasi still satisfied. But then you wake up in the morning and almost invariably that craving is gone. I mean, for many people, most people don't wake up in the morning craving chocolate biscuits and stuff like that. Some people may, but most people, it's an issue, when we're dealing with hormones. So when we wake up in the morning, we've got that, that cortisol response, which is going to be, it's counter-regulatory hormone, so our blood glucose is going to go up. So our cravings are kind of at a minimum in the morning. And so you just kind of know consistently when it's going to happen and what you can do, having a plan. And the plan isn't just, eat the box of chocolates, have an alternate plan there. And, often getting the stuff out of the house is very helpful if you can afford to do that. If you live with a family, or if you're living by yourself, just get out of your house. But if you've got family members, you can at least, put it in a way where it's not constantly, challenging you. There's I think there's some good studies on, decision making. And, if you have to make this decision once a day and you say, no, it's very easy. But if you have to make if you have to keep being confronted by that decision 20 times a day, like, you have a plate of cookies sitting on the counter, you've got to walk by it 20 times. One, it's much more likely you're going to succumb on one of those occasions. So put it out of sight, out of mind, get it out of the house, get it, put it in the cupboard, not in an easy accessible place. Some people, like on a carnivore diet, most of my food, essentially all my food is in the refrigerator. I don't have stuff on the shelves because I'm not putting steaks on the shelves. So I don't even open the cupboards. I mean, this is where my food is, and this is how I eat. And I'm pretty, from my perspective, I just eat a lot. And if I'm hungry, I'll eat until I'm full. And that works pretty well for me. It, helps me maintain, I think, a healthy body composition and, and that type of stuff. But I think, also enjoying what you do have access to eat. I mean, you should be an excellent cook. I mean, this is one of the problems is a lot of people, they're not very good at preparing food. And it's been sort of another shame that we've lost our capacity to even take care of ourselves and feed ourselves. So we rely on, these processed foods. I saw a survey on, I think it was the Generation Z or millennials, where they were saying that they didn't want to eat cereal anymore. Not because they felt it was unhealthy, but because it was too much work to pour a bowl of cereal, because they had to wash their dish and, they had to contend with that. So they'd much rather open a package, throw it in their mouth, and throw the trash away. This is what was leading their decision on what to eat, is how convenient it is. Am I going to have to clean the dishes? And so it's kind of crazy. I enjoy cooking. I enjoy cooking steaks and playing with different techniques. And so I think that's, you should thoroughly enjoy the process and get into that and learn how to prepare food in a way that's gonna nourish you.
So, what do you eat on a carnivore diet? We finally getting to the end, and we better talk about what people actually eat.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's obviously some people are very, very strict and they'll eat nothing but meat and water, and that's it. And I've done that for many, many years. And sometimes I do that consistently. Other times I'll have some eggs, I'll have some bacon, I'll have some cheese, I'll have some yogurt, I'll put various spices on there. Most of the time I just throw salt on there, but sometimes I'll get kind of crazy and throw some, some seasoning and some ground beef or something like that. That's, for the most part what I eat. I'm not a big organ meat eater. I know a lot of people are big fans of eating organ meats. I just don't find them appealing, and I've not found any benefit. I've included them and excluded them, and I've seen no real benefit to me personally, so I don't go out of my way to eat them. I mean, if they're around and somebody's cooked them, I'll try them. Usually I find them to be at best okay, and sometimes not very palatable, but that's just me. So you can certainly do that. I think that, I think of those things, dairy is one of those things where some people just don't do well with dairy, and other people seem to do okay with it. And, there's obviously different versions of dairy and variations that people can play with. Seafoods, shellfish. I'm living in the Pacific Northwest, so I'm undoubtedly going to include more seafood in the diet just because it's local and it's so accessible here. But by and large, my diet runs between 90% and 99% some kind of red meat. Typically beef, occasionally lamb, sometimes a wild animal like elk or deer. But that's pretty much what I eat most of the time. Now, every once in a while, I'll have something that's completely off the diet. I'll have a piece of cake. I've done, like my daughter's birthday last year. I had a piece of cake. I'm not trying to save the planet save the tomatoes or save the whatever. It's not an ideology for me. It's basically based on, just health. And when I do those things, which I don't do very frequently, it's very infrequent. I don't do it for a reason that I need to refeed myself carbohydrates or believe I'm getting any kind of additional benefit from that. It's just a one-off, social concession. And so, but yeah, I mean, my diet again, and there's other people that practice it in various ways, but I think most people fall in that category. Because some people have been, they find that they can tolerate some fruit in the diet. I think that's perfectly fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think, quite honestly, a diet of meat and fruit and maybe a little bit of dairy is a pretty damn good diet, quite honestly, for a lot of people. And but I think some people that are, these people that are suffering from really horrible diseases, really bad gut issues, autoimmune diseases, things like that. I think a period of a very strict carnivore diet can be very, very informative, as to what is, what is problematic and what's not.
And you mentioned in the beginning a lot of the different conditions that you'd seen be reversed or certainly mitigated to a large extent with the carnivore diet. And you've got your book, The Carnivore Diet, so that details pretty clearly everything that we've talked about today and an awful lot more as well. So I'd recommend people going.
Yeah. So I wrote that book. I wrote that book in 2019, and I don't think I've changed much on my beliefs around what I've seen. What I've seen has pretty much been not much different. I mean, there's maybe some very minor things I would maybe adjust in it, but I'm pretty happy with the way the book turned out, and a lot of people have used it as a resource, which I think is great. But I think again, it's do your own resource, do your own experiments, see what works for you. And I think for many people would be very surprised to find out that eating a lot of meat and sometimes cutting out all those vegetables, believe it or not, can make a lot of people feel better, which is something that a lot of people are shocked to hear, which is it's it is what it is, but that's just what we see.
Okay, last question. You are a very high achieving individual. You've talked a couple of times, mentioned about your self-discipline and structure. We're in the middle of another lockdown in New Zealand, and mental health is a huge issue. We just had a baby killed a couple of days ago. And the small community I live in, domestic violence is always a problem, and it increases during these times. Children are, frustrated. Parents are worried about mental health issues. Do you have any advice? What would you suggest for people to do?
Well, I mean, certainly I empathize with the lockdowns, and if you look at, I don't know the details of the baby if she's lost to COVID, but I mean, probably, in the same period of times, due to these lockdowns, we probably had other children that have died. Sorry, my dog is barking.
The baby, it was a murder. It was a.
Okay. Well, that's, obviously that's terrible, but these lockdowns are very taxing mentally. I think, the things you can control, hopefully you can control what you can feed yourself, and take care of your diet, take care of your physical self as the best you can. I don't know the details of the lockdowns in your particular region, but if you can get outside and get some sunshine, and I think, it's obviously the winter time there. It's coming up. You guys are coming into spring, so that often raises the spirits, and do those things. And I think as much as you can participate in community, get on the phone, get on the Zoom call, find a community that you can at least talk to people, because social distancing should not mean social isolation. And I think that's something that a lot of people are falling into that. They're feeling frustrated by that. And maybe you can't see your loved one or best friend, right now, but you can still reach out and talk to them. And I think a sense of humor, try to have a sense of humor on some of this stuff. And I think that's a way, like when I was in the thick of things in Afghanistan, just dealing with horrific injuries and traumas. We try to keep a sense of humor about things. And I think, it's something that, the human spirit is incredible in the face of just, incredible adversity. People seem to, makes the best of things. And I think you just have to find that and realize that, things will change over time, and hopefully, and when you have the opportunity, I think you should utilize this experience to say, what you like about it, what you don't like about it. And when it's time to make a change, that you want to make changes, do so. Don't just be passive about things. Just think about, like I said, hey, when these lockdowns are over, I'm going to do this, and this, to ensure whatever you want the outcome to be, and carry through with that. I think it's important. I think, I won't hide my bias. I think I'm anti-lockdown, I'm anti-mandates, I'm anti a lot of these things. I think my personal freedoms trump all those things, regardless of the quote unquote greater good, in my view. I fully intend to continue to preach that message, and hopefully encourage people to do what is necessary to preserve those those beliefs and those freedoms.
Well said. I'm with you on that. Shawn, where can people find you if they want to track you down, track your work, follow you on Facebook?
Yeah, sure.
or podcast?
Yeah, well, I mean, it depends on which week it is and where I've been censored or kicked off of social media. But I mean, so you can go to meatrx.com or revero.health to find me. I'm there every day, 7 days a week. This is my company. It's our platform. So we're always there. We're not going to get kicked off our own platform. And so I'm there answering questions, and I do a live. I do a Zoom meeting like this, and there's usually 50 to 100 people in there. So I do that every single day, 7 days a week. It's not convenient for you guys because it's 9 a.m. Pacific time, but I do that. I'm on social media. I'm currently on Instagram. It's Shawn Baker 1967, SHAWN BAKER 1967. I'm pretty consistently shadow banned on that one, so sometimes you have to search and type out the whole name to find me. I'm on YouTube. I just got off a 1 week suspension on YouTube, so I just came back today. So Shawn Baker, MD. I started, a couple on Telegram, Shawn Baker, MD, on a site called Rumble, which these are right-leaning conservative sites. But I mean, literally, it's the only place you can go where you can actually speak freely, which is it's a real travesty with the censorship we're seeing. So I'm in those places. I don't do much on Facebook. I never really cared for Facebook. I mean, we have the World Carnivore Tribe, which I started several years ago, and it's got 50-some thousand members, but I almost never go there. So I'll be on Instagram, I'll be on YouTube, and then I'll be on Rumble and what's the other one? Telegram. So anyway, that's where you can find me.
We'll put those in the show notes so people can track you down. So thank you so much for a virtual visit to New Zealand. Really, really appreciate your time and your words of wisdom. Well, Susan, thanks for having me. I'd love to get back down there and see it in person again one day. I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon, but you guys got a great country and wonderful people, and I just wish the best for everybody in New Zealand. Thank you very much.